Chapter 237, Lehane 8. Glory was a demonic sword granted to Gavid Lindman by the Demon King of Incarceration himself, earning him the title of Sword of Incarceration. It was said to be the only sword capable of withstanding the power of Vermouth's Moonlight Sword, which could emit a blinding light that could obliterate anything in its path. Gavid Lindman had hardly used Glory for the past 300 years. However, despite being left untouched for a long time, the blade never lost its sharp edge. Even so, Gavid would clean and sharpen the blade of his favorite sword every night, always desiring to maintain it in its perfect condition. This particular night was no exception, and in fact he had a greater desire to sharpen his blade tonight. As Gavid sat in his room, he thought back to his encounter with Molan just a few hours ago. The intense fighting spirit that Molan exuded sent a pleasant chill down Gavid's back as he recalled the events. It brought to mind memories of the battles he had fought 300 years ago, and Gavid couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia wash over him. Just a little bit, thought Gavid while straightening his pitch-black sword. He remembered the dull glow of Molan's eyes. 300 years was not short even by the standards of the demon folks, and it was an extremely long period of time for humans. Gavid couldn't help but reflect on how time wore down even the strongest of humans. Just as rocks erode under the forces of nature, humans, too, are incapable of escaping the ravages of time. No matter how strong and excellent a human was, they would be worn out by the passage of time, even Molan. I had been looking forward to it. Gavid recalled the disappointment he felt when Molan did not immediately engage him in battle despite his manic demeanor. After 300 years of isolation, Gavid had expected Molan's madness to manifest as violent aggression, but he had been proven wrong. Instead, Molan hurled insults and taunts at Gavid but made no move to draw his weapon. It was a far cry from their past battles, where they had clashed in a frenzied dance of death. He's human, but he is unlike the other humans. Gavid Lindman stared at the black blade that devoured all light, muttering to himself about Molan Roar. Unlike other humans, there was something special about him. Molan's energy had ignited Gavid's fighting spirit, and he had eagerly anticipated a battle with him. But it had been for naught. Molan had insulted him but hadn't unsheathed his weapon. Disappointed, Gavid had no choice but to take out his sword and appease his desire for a fight. The demonic sword Glory was a gift from the Demon King of Incarceration, and Gavid honored it by taking care of it. Whenever he felt the urge to let loose, he would sharpen and wipe his blade as he did now. Glory had a calming effect on Gavid Lindman's inner turmoil, and he couldn't help but wonder if Molan had something similar. It wasn't quite a sense of kinship, but Gavid couldn't shake off the memory of Molan's fierce eyes as he approached the fortress from across the snowfield. They had burned with the fury of a wild beast ready to tear apart its prey. But as soon as Molan had arrived at the gate, his aggression had dissipated like a gust of wind. It was a strange shift, and Gavid couldn't help but feel disappointed that the anticipated battle with Molan hadn't come to fruition. Was it because his descendants were watching? Or was it because he saw an imitation incarnation that looked exactly like Anise Slywood? If not that either, is it because he felt the blood of Vermouth Lionheart? Gavid continued to muse. Despite not sharing a physical resemblance, Eugene Lionheart possessed a brilliance and talent that was reminiscent of his ancestor, Vermouth Lionheart. It was a gift few humans could boast about and one that had propelled Vermouth to great heights, enabling him to become a hero and reach the Demon Kings. Even Eugene knew that he had inherited this gift from his ancestor, and he would one day reach similar heights. The same blood that had flowed in Vermouth's veins now coursed through Eugene's, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before he too would rise to become the hero. Molan would have also felt the blood flowing in Eugene Lionheart's veins. After all, he had fought together with Vermouth in the past. Either way, Gavid felt it was a pity. If Molan had caved into his madness and attacked him, it would have given Gavid the justification to fight against him. Don't just stand there. Come in, said Gavid while putting Glory back into its sheath. The flap unfurled and Amelia Merwin smiled on the other side of the entrance. Isn't this a bit too shabby to be the quarters of Helmuth's Duke? Asked Amelia. This is not my territory, is it? Countered Gavid. If you wish, they will give you a castle. Or would you prefer I build a castle for you? Said Amelia. You're still as rude as always. Gavid couldn't help but smile at Amelia's usual rudeness. She had a habit of referring to everyone as you regardless of their rank or status, except for the demon king of incarceration, whom she addressed with the proper title. Gavid had always found it amusing, but he knew better than to let his guard down with her. After all, if Amelia had dared to disrespect the demon king, Gavid would have been the first to strike her down. It's a pleasant and grateful offer, but I will have to refuse. I am feeling comfortable enough in this tent, Gavid refused with a smile. Amelia let out a soft snort as she heard Gavid's response. Without a word, a dark shadow rose up from beneath her and took the shape of a chair. She gracefully took a seat in front of Gavid and crossed her legs, her sharp gaze fixed on him. I see you still have poor taste, Gavid said snidely. Himoria, who stood behind Amelia with a bone in her mouth, glared at the back of Amelia's head with a murderous look and let out ragged breaths. However, when she made eye contact with Gavid, she flinched and shrank back as if afraid of something. A mixture of many things, Gavid continued as he took a closer look at Himoria, noticing the crimson shade of her eyes and the sharpness of her teeth. She was holding a bone in her mouth, and there was something about her that didn't seem quite human. Despite her outward appearance, there was an otherworldly quality to her existence that set her apart. He knew that she wasn't human. Do you still obsess over those kinds of existences? Gavid asked Amelia. Did you forget I hate that question? Retorted Amelia. Ah, how rude of me. It's just been so long since I've last seen you. Has it been 70 years since we last met? Asked Gavid. Amelia's words carried a mysterious tone as she smiled at Gavid. Her gaze swept over Himoria's legs, seemingly finding amusement in her presence. I may have forgotten the distant past, she said, but why don't you ask me why I've come? I have known you for 200 years. Although I have not seen you as often as I have known you, I know you are a very vicious wizard. If I may guess based on this fact, I think you are here to ask me to join you in a malicious plan, responded Gavid. Amelia nonchalantly relayed the purpose of her visit, her shoulders lifting and dropping in a shrug. They're planning to incorporate monsters into their joint training. Aroth and Nahama's wizards will be handling the summoning, but I figured I'd lend a hand and summon a few myself. Is that so? Said Gavid. If you invest just a little bit of mana, I can create a very enjoyable, entertaining mess here. What do you think? I think you might have fun with it, said Amelia. Gavid gave a slight chuckle and nodded his head in agreement. That's certainly an interesting proposition, Amelia, he said, looking at her with a curious expression. But I'm afraid I have to decline. While I'm personally intrigued by the idea of the chaos you plan to create, I know that His Majesty the Demon King would not approve of such a venture. After coming all this way, said Amelia, I did not come to the north to lend you strength. I simply wanted to see the hero and the saint in person. Didn't you expect me to give you such an answer? Responded Gavid. Amelia did not deny his accusation, and her smile did not falter at Gavid's rejection. She had expected it after all. Her proposition was not made earnestly. Even if she were to summon a legion of savage monsters, the combined might of the Night March would easily overpower them. If you're unwilling to help, there's no reason for me to go ahead with the plan. She immediately gave up on her lingering feelings. Amelia leaned forward, her eyes focused intently on Gavid. Let me ask you something else, she said. I'm sure you may have expected this somewhat, but there's something I've wanted to do for a long time. The same reason why I was stuck in that sandy desert. Her tone was serious, and it was clear that whatever she was about to say was important to her. Are you worried that I might intervene? Asked Gavid. No other duke would intervene except you. Morgiabella will have a lot of fun watching, and so will Raizakia, that dragon. But you're the sword of incarceration, right? If I do something to break the peace that the demon king of incarceration wants, said Amelia. His Majesty respects the freedom of his servants, responded Gavid. He did not know exactly what Amelia was up to, but he knew she had prepared for a long time. He also knew that the demon king of incarceration wasn't irrelevant to the matter. Amelia Merwin wasn't the only one like this. All three mages of incarceration had directly signed contracts with the demon king of incarceration. Edmund Codrith and Balzac Ludbeth also shared similar desires as wizards, which Gavid considered highly presumptuous and arrogant. Despite this, the demon king of incarceration did not restrict the mages in their aspirations. On the contrary, he granted them unrestricted freedom to pursue their goals and even provided material assistance to achieve them. I do not know what you are trying to achieve. His Majesty would know, But he has not ordered me to stop you, said Gavid. I would like you to tell me for sure that you won't come to kill me no matter what I do, said Amelia. That's not something for me to decide. If whatever you do goes overboard and His Majesty becomes heartbroken and orders me to bring your head, I will have no other choice but to obey his order. It wasn't the answer Amelia was hoping for, but she understood it was the best answer she could hope for from the Sword of Incarceration. As such, she pursued it no further and nodded in understanding. I will not be giving such an order. Amelia had been ready to depart from the tent as there was nothing more to discuss. But just as she was about to leave, a voice emanated from the shadows under the light, stopping her in her tracks. The voice contained no significant presence or weight. It was simply a voice. However, Gavid and Amelia knew very well who the voice belonged to. The two immediately jumped from their seats with pale expressions while Himoria tilted her head with confusion, unable to understand why they were acting so flustered. I do not want to trample on your efforts and hard work, the voice continued. An eye opened in the darkness. There was still no presence to be felt, but unlike the voice, the eye caused Himoria to fall to the floor unconscious with just a gaze. However, Amelia could not turn her eyes away from the eye. Your Majesty, why have you come to such a shabby place? Said Gavid, bowing deeply and respectfully. He was used to hearing the voice of the Demon King of Incarceration coming down from the top floor of Babel. However, it had been a very long time since Gavid last felt the existence of the Demon King of Incarceration and was faced with his eye. It made Gavid tremble with ecstasy. I am not here to scold you, said the Demon King of Incarceration. His eye was the only thing visible in the darkness. Amelia clenched her fist while trembling. Then, are you here to rebuke me? She asked. I have told you already. I do not wish to trample on your hard work and effort, responded the Demon King. Gavid and Amelia stayed silent at this confirmation. If your long-cherished wish comes true, you will have great honor. But if you fail, you will have to pay the price. Amelia Merwin, all of my servants have signed the same contract, including you. Have you forgotten? Asked the Demon King. How could I have forgotten? After all, you are providing me with as much mana as I want, responded Amelia. The contract she had with the Demon King of Incarceration was simple but powerful. Amelia could receive as much mana from the Demon King of Incarceration as she desired. However, this power was not something to be taken lightly, as even those who had a contract with the Demon King could easily be destroyed by his immense power. Thankfully, Amelia was able to adjust the amount of power she received, allowing her to obtain just the right amount at the right time without overwhelming her. She wasn't the only one with this ability, as all three mages of incarceration were capable of doing the same. When one made a pact with a demon, there was always a price to be paid. The most common currency for such deals was one's soul in exchange for power. As soon as the contractee perished, their soul would be the property of the demon they made a pact with. The contract between Amelia and the Demon King of Incarceration was no different. Amelia was aware that when her time came to pass, her soul would be surrendered to the Demon King. That wasn't all. The Demon Kings were unique beings whose power thrived on worship. Just as faith and worship in a god made them divine, similarly the awe and worship of the Demon Kings increased their power and made them who they were. It was this fundamental difference that set the Demon Kings apart from other demon folks. The Demon King of Incarceration thrived on fear. The very mention of his name was enough to strike terror in the hearts of people, and their reverence towards his existence only increased his power. For the Demon King, fear was a sweet nectar, a different kind of worship that only served to strengthen his hold on the devildom of Helmuth. As such, if Amelia ran wild to fulfill her long-cherished goal, the world would come to know of her name and her identity as the Black Wizard who was contracted with the Demon King of Incarceration. The fear it would strike into the hearts of the humans would be transformed into the power of the Demon King of Incarceration. And once Amelia died, the soul of the Black Wizard who struck fear into the hearts of many would be added to the Demon King of Incarceration's collection. He would gain the great power she accumulated and the fear she represented. Amelia shuddered at the mere thought of such a fate befalling her. The image of her soul being owned by the Demon King, as was the case with all Black Wizards who had made contracts with demons, was enough to make her blood run cold. She was not alone in her fear. Every Black Wizard knew the horror of having their soul taken away. Death offered no comfort to those who had made such pacts, and that was why so many of them desperately sought to change their fate. Amelia was no exception to this rule. "Is Molin here?" muttered the Demon King. Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, a great force blew away Gavid's tent. But the only thing that flew away was the tent. It was the result of Gavid immediately erecting a spell to protect the space. "Unthinkable!" Gavid bellowed, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his sword. His rage was palpable, a seething, simmering force that threatened to spill over at any moment. Yet he did not draw his blade. The Demon King of Incarceration had not given the order, and Gavid knew better than to act without his ruler's command. Still, the sheer weight of his fury was enough to fill the air, suffocating all those present. Before anyone knew it, the black fog flocked behind Gavid, and once the fog lifted, the demon knights were kneeling in unison. Located within a tendril of darkness was a crimson eye. None of the Black Fog Knights had ever encountered the Demon King of Incarceration, but they instinctively knew who the eye and the darkness belonged to. "Molin roar," said the voice from within the darkness. The eye rolled and Molin raised himself straight. He had come straight from the top of the fortress castle. He had been drinking happily with Eugene and Anise until just seconds ago, but his mind was completely clear right now. The only things occupying him were great hatred and the will to kill. Incarceration. Molin spat out the Demon King's name as if it were poison, his lips twisted in a snarl of hatred and fury. He was the first to arrive, but others soon followed, drawn by his fierce determination and unwavering resolve. Eugene landed behind Molin, wreathed in purple flames that danced and flickered around him like a living thing. His eyes blazed with a fierce intensity, matching Molin's own in their unwavering focus. Anise landed gracefully behind the two men, her wings of light unfurled behind her like a halo of pure radiance. "I do not wish to cause a disturbance," the voice spoke, and the darkness writhed in response. Soon others began to gather. The first to arrive were the Blood-Cross Knights of the Ura's Empire, their armor clanging and their weapons at the ready. Raphael was in the lead, and he drew his greatsword upon seeing the darkness and the red eye before springing into the air as if ready to strike. "Stop!" shouted Anise. The cry contained a great deal of divine power, and it caused Raphael to stop in midair. Raphael looked up at Anise with an astonished expression, then gave a slight nod before putting down his greatsword. The Blood-Cross Knights faced off against the Black Fog, and soon members of the Lionheart family and Kiel's White Dragon Knights arrived. The knights, who were continuing to increase in number, surrounded the Black Fog to prevent them from escaping. But that's only what it looked like on the surface. Eugene glared at the darkness while clenching his fists. Soon the kings of the continent began to arrive, each with their own unique reactions. The Pope of Uras gasped in pain as he clutched his chest, blood seeping from his stigmata, despite not having summoned any miracles. The Emperor of Kiel's bloodshot eyes remained fixed on the darkness, but his body betrayed him, his legs trembling uncontrollably as his instincts kicked in. Despite this, he stood tall, refusing to let his fear show, but only barely. Even though the opponent was his equal, the emperor of an empire, he was also the Demon King who reigned for an extremely long period. In particular, the Demon King of Incarceration was special and more powerful, even among the Demon Kings. The authorities of the emperors were meaningless in the face of the Demon King of Incarceration's overwhelming power. "I do not want to be misunderstood," murmured the Demon King of Incarceration. The darkness suddenly wriggled. "Oh!" Gavid shouted in a voice filled with awe and kneeled on the spot. Amelia could not stand any longer as well. As arrogant as she was, she could not help but kneel. "I am not here to break my promise." The Demon King's voice echoed in the air, and the darkness took the shape of a human form, revealing the Demon King of Incarceration. His bloodless pale skin and ruby-red eyes were striking, and his beauty was undeniable. The Demon King of Incarceration continued while caressing the horn on his head. "If you are misunderstanding my visit and are wary towards me, I hope to resolve the misunderstanding." Molin glared at the Demon King of Incarceration with bloodshot eyes and spoke. "I heard you warned the world." The appearance of the Demon King reminded him of the encounter he had 300 years ago on the top floor of Babel, which had left him in despair. The Demon King of Incarceration nodded and responded, "Yes, I did." As he moved his hands, the chains wrapped around his wrists produced a metallic sound. "But I gave another choice. Few humans show me all, then I will return it with respect. As long as the goodwill I show is not violated, I will not take the initiative to end the peace. Suddenly, a voice interrupted the tense silence. It was not one of the kings, but Gilead Lionheart, the head of the Lionheart family. His legs trembled under the weight of the Demon King's pressure, but he gritted his teeth and stood his ground. Demon King of Incarceration, he said, his voice steady but filled with determination. I am Gilead Lionheart, head of the Lionheart family. I know your name. Dear descendant of Vermouth, what would you like to ask me? Said the Demon King of Incarceration. I would like to ask you about the warning. You made my adopted son the receiver of your warning, and you said that the end of the oath was coming, continued Gilead. The Demon King of Incarceration responded, tilting his head. The oath wasn't made to last forever. His crimson gaze looked past Gilead towards Eugene. 300 years ago your forefather, my dear Vermouth, made a promise with me, a promise for peace. I will not speak details of the oath since that is not what Vermouth wanted. But descendants of Vermouth, do not misunderstand the end of the oath. The end of the oath is inevitable. You may show respect and all, and I may return the favor, but regardless, someday the peace obtained by the oath will end, said the Demon King of Incarceration. Then, could we not renew the oath? If needed, then I can. Who could replace Vermouth? Said the Demon King of Incarceration with a smile. His words weren't only directed at Gilead. It was a message to everyone who was standing in this place. He continued while staring directly at Eugene's face. No one can replace Vermouth. The oath was made, and it was only possible because it was Vermouth Lionheart. The Demon King of Incarceration suddenly stopped, then turned his gaze from Eugene and stared at Molan. The Demon King of Incarceration's voice rang out with a commanding tone, cutting through the tense silence. Molan Roar was struggling to control his breathing, his muscles tense and ready to spring into action. But the Demon King's words seemed to reach him and he hesitated. Don't be a fool, Molan. Stop with the reckless bravado, the Demon King of Incarceration continued, his eyes fixed on the agitated man. Killing me here and now will not bring you what you seek. It will only bring you more suffering. Care. Don't you have something else to do than kill me? Asked the Demon King of Incarceration. Crack. Molan's teeth broke and he stared at the Demon King of Incarceration with bloodshot eyes for a while, then took a deep breath. I see, muttered Molan, nodding. He blinked a few times, then took a step back with a scoff. I want to kill you right now. I want to finish what I couldn't 300 years ago. Do you really believe you can achieve what you failed to do 300 years ago when you were with Vermouth, Sienna, and Anise? Asked the Demon King of Incarceration. No, I don't think so. I wanted to attack you and I wanted to die, answered Molan frankly. But I cannot die like that, at least not now. So I will not attack you. The Demon King of Incarceration's smile changed slightly at Molan's answer. He gazed at Molan with the same smile before nodding. I respect your decision. Then he wiped the smile off his face. Molan Roar, I don't mean just you either. Kings of the continent, knights who serve them, mercenaries who wander the battlefield, and other warriors. I respect all of your wills. I know why all of you have gathered here. He continued after lowering his voice to almost a whisper. So I will take my leave now. If you want war, come to my territory. Just as your forefathers did 300 years ago, come to Pandemonium, climb Babel and point your blades at me. The Demon King of Incarceration's body began to scatter into darkness. If you wish to do so, I will gladly wait there. Have I shown enough grace, Eugene Lionheart? The Demon King of Incarceration suddenly called Eugene's name, then stared at him with narrowed eyes as he disappeared. Master of the Holy Sword, descendant of Vermouth. Eugene glared back at the Demon King of Incarceration without answering. Will you climb Babel? Asked the Demon King of Incarceration. Eugene recalled the vision of Vermouth from the dark room. Just as I did, stand before the Demon King of Incarceration and meet with his true body. What will happen after that are things you will have to experience yourself. Yes, said Eugene as his lips twisted into a smile. He raised his middle finger towards the disappearing figure of the Demon King of Incarceration. I don't know when, but I'll make sure to go. You, shouted Gavid angrily. He had never imagined that anyone would be mad enough to show such a disrespectful gesture towards the Demon King of Incarceration. However, the demon king of incarceration only laughed in response as if he found it entertaining. He laid his hand on Gavid's shoulder and stopped him from running forward. "Don't be rude." "But your majesty." "He is my guest," whispered the demon king of incarceration, and Gavid bowed with a grimace. Just before he disappeared, the demon king of incarceration looked at Eugene with smiling eyes and spoke. "I look forward to the day you come to Babel." Then he disappeared completely. Until the moment there were absolutely no traces of the demon king of incarceration. Gavid kept his head bowed and his knees touching the ground. The demon king of incarceration had called Eugene a guest, and Gavid had no complaints. The profanity that Eugene Lionheart showed deserved 1,000 grueling deaths, but his lord had commanded him not to be rude. "Until you come to Babel, that is," Gavid thought. Gavid soothed his mind while chewing on his lips, then stood up from the ground. Or at least he attempted to rise up. But just before he could do so, Eugene Lionheart's blade suddenly fell towards his head. Chapter 238, Lahane 9. The blade of incarceration, Gavid Lindman, could never be unaware of Eugene's sword nearing his head. Yet although he had sensed the sword's approach early on, he failed to respond. "What is this?" Gavid thought, shocked. And the reason for his delayed reaction was simple. He just didn't understand why the sword was coming toward him. They had been in the presence of the demon king of incarceration until just a moment ago. Although he had not materialized in his true form, the demon king of incarceration had taken a physical body of darkness out of respect for the insignificant humans gathered here. His Majesty, the demon king of incarceration, had graced himself in this place until just seconds ago. Gavid Lindman was a Duke of Helmuth, the blade of incarceration, and the only knight of the demon king of incarceration. Although there had been countless eyes surrounding them, Gavid had not been ashamed to kneel and bow before his lord. As such, he had maintained his kneeling and bowing posture until the moment his lord had disappeared completely. The sword had fallen towards his head at that moment as if to behead a sinner. As the sword fell towards Gavid, a brilliant light wrapped around it, pushing back the darkness that had surrounded them. Gavid, who had hoped to consume the light with his dark powers, found himself retreating instead, his expression flustered and unsure. He raised his head and saw Eugene standing before him, holding Altair, the holy sword. The two locked eyes. It had been an incomprehensible ambush and Gavid was taken back. But Eugene was utterly calm. In fact, he stared at Gavid while slightly tilting his head to the side. The confusion in the area was palpable, and Gavid was not the only one struggling to comprehend the sudden turn of events. Amelia, who had been kneeling beside him in a similar fashion, glared at Eugene with a mixture of irritation and a hint of murderous intent. She knew that divine power was critical against black magic, and though she had managed to retreat and avoid getting caught up in the fray, she couldn't help but wonder how much damage she would have sustained if she had been caught off guard. "What are you doing?" asked Amelia as her lips twitched. She was holding her pet, Himoria, by the scruff of her neck. Although Himoria was a rather disobedient pet, she couldn't let her die in such a ridiculous fashion. "That I am very curious about as well," Gavid spat out, his tone tinged with bitterness. Gavid's voice was filled with barely contained anger, and he struggled to keep his emotions in check. He glared at Eugene with suspicion and confusion, struggling to comprehend the young man's actions. Behind him, the knights of the Black Fog rose to their feet in unison, their sharp gazes fixed on Eugene like the edge of a blade. Though they had not yet drawn their swords, the tension in the air was palpable, and it was clear that they were ready for whatever may come. The intense glares and the almost tangible killing intent emanating from Gavid and his knights were like a tidal wave, threatening to overwhelm Eugene. However, Eugene had experienced too much in his short life to be intimidated by such things. He kept his expression cool and collected, even as he threw the holy sword up into the air with a swift motion. Gavid couldn't help but furrow his brow in confusion as he watched Eugene toss the holy sword into the air. What was the purpose of such a strange action? However, it didn't take long for him to realize the reason behind Eugene's seemingly bizarre action. The moment the holy sword had left his hand, Eugene immediately retrieved a huge bow out of his cape. The bow was an unusual sight to behold. Its shape was unlike any other bow. Strangely, there was no visible bowstring, yet the bow itself stood as tall as Eugene. Moreover, it appeared to be more of a decorative item than a practical weapon. However, beneath its ornamental appearance, Gavid knew the true identity of the bow, Thunderbolt Pernoa. It was one of the ancient weapons once possessed by Vermouth Lionheart, a weapon whose origin and whereabouts were largely unknown. "You crazy bastard!" shouted Gavid with a grimace. His expression contorted in a mix of anger and confusion as he watched Eugene release the non-existent bowstring. Meanwhile, Eugene seemed to relish the effect his actions were having on Gavid. He allowed a small smile to play on his lips as he watched Gavid's reaction. Crack! Eugene's mana coursed through his body and transformed into the bowstring of Thunderbolt Pernoa, drawing it back with ease. The combination of lightning flame and the ancient weapon was powerful, with the former enhancing the latter's abilities. Normally, the bow would have devoured as much mana as it needed to fire an arrow, but the mana imbued with lightning flame allowed for the formation of Pernoa's bowstring without much consumption. Eugene couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement at the name that popped into his head for his new technique: Flash of the Violet Thunderbolt. However, he knew it was better to keep it to himself. It was a name meant only for him to know, a secret that he could never allow anyone else to know. As Eugene drew the bow, a purple bolt of thunder was unleashed, causing the surrounding air to tremble. The power of the arrow was incomparably greater than before, leaving everyone shocked and amazed at what Eugene was about to unleash. Gavid reflexively placed his hand on Glory, ready to draw his sword at a moment's notice. "Don't be rude. He's my guest." But as he reached for the pommel of his sword, the voice of his lord resounded in Gavid's head. How could he forget? The Demon King of Incarceration had told him just moments ago. His lord had voiced that he was looking forward to seeing that human arrive at Babel. His lord had commanded him to not be rude towards that human. His lord had called that human a guest. All of this stifled Gavid's impulse. For the Blade of Incarceration, each word of the Demon King of Incarceration was an absolute command that he needed to obey. As such, Gavid did not unsheath Glory. Rumbly. The purple bolt of lightning shot into the air, but Gavid did not flinch or try to dodge the attack. He also did not draw his sword, Glory. Instead, Gavid swung his right hand as if it were a sword and redirected the trajectory of the attack upwards. Astonishingly, Gavid did not even receive a scratch from the powerful attack. He shed not a single drop of blood. Gavid's sleeve was torn, and he clenched his teeth in frustration as he glared at the ragged fabric. He was about to express his irritation but had no time for such trivial matters. As the electric current from the thunderbolt faded away, another powerful attack slammed into Gavid, sending him hurtling through the air. Eugene unleashed the dragon spear carbos, gathering an enormous amount of mana into a single point and unleashing it in a powerful blow. It was comparable to a dragon's breath in its ferocity, and while Eugene couldn't attack multiple times at once, the single blow was enough to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies. In the past, Eugene had struggled to utilize the dragon's spear to its fullest due to his lack of mana, but now he could unleash its full power without much effort. "You flew quite far," Eugene remarked. Eugene's lips curled upwards in a grin as he withdrew the dragon spear carbos back into his cloak after Gavid had been flung a great distance away. However, he knew using the demon spear Luentos, Annihilation Hammer Jigalath, or the Moonlight Sword would provoke Gavid into unsheathing Glory. Despite Gavid being completely subservient to the Demon King of Incarceration's will, Eugene was well aware that Gavid would not hesitate to draw the sword if he was pushed into it. Gavid's loyalty to the Demon King of Incarceration was unwavering, and Eugene knew that as long as he refrained from pushing Gavid too far, he would not unsheath Glory or use the Demon Eye of Divine Glory. Instead, Gavid would obediently follow the Demon King's commands to the best of his ability. Eugene would not use his signature. An ace up his sleeve only increased in value as long as it was kept a secret, so Eugene only relied on the holy sword as he charged forward. Strahd II's face twisted in anger as he shouted, "Stop that madman!" He couldn't fathom why Eugene would suddenly attack a Duke of Helmuth, especially after the Demon King of Incarceration had just departed. What was the reason behind provoking Gavid Lindman in such a manner? The thought made Strahd's blood boil with confusion and frustration. "Sir Alcester, we need to." Alchester's eyes narrowed as he considered the situation before him. Though he was not entirely sure what was going on, he had enough faith in Eugene's abilities to believe that the young genius would not act without reason. "I do not think that will be necessary," Alcestis replied, his voice calm and measured. Despite the urgency of the situation, he was determined to maintain his composure. Hero of the Holy Sword. Eugene Lionheart, if you wish to continue the legacy of your progenitor, then you will one day head to Helmuth as the hero. Alcestis held Eugene in great esteem, so much so that he entrusted him with his family's secret technique, the empty sword. And Eugene didn't disappoint him. He had quickly mastered the technique and even created several layers of it in a short time. Eugene Lionheart was not just a prodigious swordsman. He possessed a multitude of admirable qualities that made him stand out from the rest. His talent for the sword and sense for battle were unrivaled, but there was more to him than that. Eugene was also incredibly generous and thoughtful, going above and beyond to help those around him. He even took the time to teach Alcestis's young son, Leo, techniques to better handle mana. Eugene was also humble in nature. Despite his prodigious talent, he never once showed any arrogance during his time with the Dragonic family. It was no wonder that Alcestis held him in such high regard. For you, the opportunity to clash against the blade of incarceration should be something that cannot be bought with any amount of money. Moreover, since the Demon King of Incarceration called you a guest and promised to treat you accordingly, his loyal knight will not be able to act recklessly toward you. As Alcestis pondered over Eugene's unexpected attack on Gavid, he realized the daring and cleverness behind Eugene's actions. With a pleased smile and a newfound flame in his heart, Alcestis nodded in agreement. Alcestis couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and admiration for Eugene's character and believed that one day he would rise as the hero, standing tall and proud as he declared his mission to kill the Demon Kings. Alcestis Dragonic held his ancestors in high regard, and none more so than Oryx Dragonic, who had made the noble decision to stay behind and protect the Kiel Empire during the war 3 centuries ago instead of joining the battle in Helmuth. Alcestis admired his forefathers' sense of duty and honor, but at times he couldn't help but wonder about the possibilities of what could have been. Alcestis Dragonic often pondered what could have been if his ancestor Oryx Dragonic had chosen to accompany the great Vermouth and his comrades, the stupid Hamel, wise Sienna, faithful Anise, and the brave Molin, instead of remaining behind to guard the Kiel Empire during the war 300 years ago. He wondered what it would have been like if his ancestor had become one of the legendary heroes etched into history, and often found himself lost in thought, imagining what that reality would have been like. I am fortunate. Alcestis maintained a thin smile even though Straught II was fuming by his side. Alcestis was lost in thought, considering the possibility that one day Eugene Lionheart might search for companions to challenge Babel. In that event, Alcestis knew he would give up everything he had, his status as a Duke of Kiel, his place in the Dragonic family, just to be a part of that heroic quest that would go down in history. However, Eugene wasn't engaging Gavid in a battle to get a better grasp of the blade of incarceration to better prepare himself for the future. This is perfect for venting my anger. That was all. Eugene was releasing all the emotions he had bottled up from his past life, knowing that Gavid could not retaliate or wield his sword freely. This was the only reason behind his relentless attack. Anise couldn't help but whisper to herself, "That crazy bastard," as she watched Eugene unleash his fury on Gavid. While others may not have understood the reason for Eugene's sudden outburst, Anise knew the truth. Eugene would have made careful and calculated judgments in his own way, but at that moment, his emotions had gotten the best of him. Hamel's unpredictable personality had likely caused Eugene to lose control. "Oh!" Molin let out a loud cry and clenched his fists in an attempt to join the fray. However, Anise quickly clung to his arm and snapped at him in a quiet voice, preventing him from interfering. "You idiot. What would we do if you attacked him too?" Don't answer me. Your voice is so stupidly loud that everyone will hear your words even if you whisper. So just shut your mouth and listen to me carefully. Don't do anything and stand right here," said Anise. The Demon King of Incarceration had only extended hospitality to Eugene, leaving everyone else as potential targets for the blade of incarceration. Any interference could result in deadly consequences, and Anise was not willing to risk anyone else's safety. As Gilead pondered the situation, he came to the same realization as Alcestis. The blade of incarceration wasn't interested in attacking Eugene and was content to simply block his frenzied assault. However, Gilead knew that the battle couldn't continue indefinitely. He drew his own blade and charged forward, determined to put a stop to the fight. Carmen also joined in, getting her weapon, Heaven Genocide. Please wait a moment. Anise tried to stop the members of the Lionheart family, but she couldn't figure out what to say. She hesitated for a moment, then closed her eyes tight. "Ah!" Anise let out a scream despite feeling embarrassed and humiliated. With determination, she unfurled her wings of light and tightly grasped onto her hair. Feeling that 2 wings were not enough, she summoned 2 more and spread them out, now proudly displaying 4 wings in total. "The revelation of light," she shouted. "Sister." Christina couldn't help but exclaim. "Please stay still. This embarrasses me more than it does you." Christina's mind echoed with screams as she watched Anise's frenzied behavior. Her body trembled uncontrollably as if possessed by a divine force while she tore at her own hair to add to the dramatic scene. Anise's wings unfurled and glowed like the sun, leaving the Knights of Lionheart no choice but to halt in their tracks and turn their attention to her. As Anise continued to feign her divine possession, Eugene relentlessly pushed Gavid until he was backed against the wall. The demon eye of divine glory was still not utilized, and glory remained in its sheath. Gavid's eyes glared at Eugene with fierce killing intent. "Are you sure you should be glaring like that at your master's guest?" said Eugene tauntingly. "You little bastard. You knew I would not fight back," responded Gavid, gritting his teeth. Boom. Eugene's attack was intercepted by Gavid, who used his forearm as a shield. Despite his previously immaculate appearance, Gavid's uniform was now tattered and dirty, and his perfectly styled hair was now disheveled. "Who told you not to fight back? If you want to, go right ahead," taunted Eugene. "Are you confident you can handle it? Engrave this into your mind, you damn thing. The only reason you are allowed to breathe and keep your life is that His Majesty called you his guest because he said he was looking forward to seeing you in Babel," shouted Gavid. "Speaking of which, when I come to Babel, are you going to make way for me so I can climb to the top in peace?" asked Eugene mockingly. Gavid shot back, his eyes glimmering with murderous intent. "Utter nonsense. His Majesty did not say a word about opening the doors for you. It had been 300 long years. Had there been no demon folk who challenged the Demon King without knowing their place in the meantime? Countless young and ambitious aristocrats had risen to challenge the Demon King, confident in their own strength. But none of them had truly known their place. Babel, the Demon King of Incarceration's castle in Pandemonium, stood tall with 99 floors, each staffed with officials and workers who managed the castle's security during peaceful times. But when someone dared to challenge the Demon King's throne, the castle transformed into a demonic fortress just like it did 300 years ago. Countless traps, demon folks and beasts lurked in every corner, blocking the challenger's path to the top. Gavid Lindman, the Blade of Incarceration, guarded the floor just beneath the palace, and despite numerous attempts by challengers, none had ever made it past him except for the Great Vermouth and his comrades. "If you come to Babel, I will personally reap your head, and I will present it to His Majesty with my own hands," declared Gavid. "The Demon King of Incarceration will not let you climb Babel in peace since that's the kind of being he is." "Was that so?" Eugene snorted while recalling Vermouth's words. "So if I never go to Babel, you won't ever get to kill me. You bastard." "No. Will you come to kill me yourself if I don't make the trip? If you do that, won't you be violating the wishes of the Demon King of Incarceration?" taunted Eugene. Gavid's expression contorted after hearing Eugene's words. Some things had not changed over the course of 300 years, and this was one of them. Gavid, the honest-to-God fellow, was still absolutely obedient to his master's orders. If you do not come, if you hole yourself in the Lionheart clan like a little rat, then I will come to get you myself. His Majesty will give me the orders to do so," shouted Gavid fiercely. The two exchanged another blow. Boom. Gavid redirected Eugene's attack, which resulted in a huge crack in the walls of Fort Lehane. "Ah, you don't have to worry about that. I'll definitely be heading to the Demon King's castle," said Eugene mockingly. He laughed while pointing to Gavid's ragged sleeves. Gavid's brows shot up at the mockery. "Do not test me, human. Even if you were recognized by the Holy Sword, and even if the blood of Vermouth flows thickly in your veins. You are not Vermouth. Do you really believe you can reach his level? Do you take me for an idiot? I'm Eugene Lionheart, not Vermouth Lionheart." "Isn't that obvious?" retorted Eugene. "Even Vermouth wasn't as arrogant as you are," roared Gavid. Well, of course, since I'm not Vermouth Lionheart, said Eugene. Your arrogance knows no bounds. Where does your baseless confidence come from? Asked Gavid. Eugene was about to give a random answer when he heard Anissa's scream, the revelation of light. He stole a sideway glance and saw Anisse glowing with 4 of her wings unfurled. Eugene couldn't help but laugh at the sight. Revelation, said Eugene. What? Gavid said, confused. Did you not hear? It's a revelation. The holy sword which acknowledged me and the light said that I could be arrogant, said Eugene. Complete nonsense, cried Gavid. Eugene ignored his words and concentrated the power of the white flame formula on the holy sword. It was just like the time he was in the Fount of Light. The sword devoured his mana greedily. Despite being a non-believer with absolutely no faith, he couldn't help but marvel at the sword's ability to emit a radiant light that could dispel all the darkness in the surrounding area. It wasn't just the holy sword either. As Eugene wielded the holy sword, he felt a hot, throbbing sensation coming from his left hand's ring finger. The ring of Agaroth from the ancient god of war, bestowed upon him by the red dragon, was reacting to his mana and the sword's radiance. The light of the holy sword grew brighter. It was brilliant enough to dispel the darkness, but it didn't exude a feeling of holiness. Rather, it was brutal, like the flames of war that threatened to destroy everything. Revelation. Gavid stood still, frozen in place by the threatening light emanating from Eugene's holy sword. As the light descended towards him, Gavid could feel the power of the strike bearing down on him. This attack was different from the ones before. The moment the light washed over him, Gavid instinctively drew glory. Rumbly. The wall shattered into rubble, but Gavid remained unscathed. However, his attention was fixed on the sword in his grip. He had acted on pure instinct, unable to resist the urge to draw his blade. He should have just taken the hit and let his body regenerate, but he had failed to control his impulses. But I judged that I could not. Why? Was it because of the holy sword's divine power? Even so. Gavid's lips quivered. So you finally drew your blade after acting like you wouldn't all this time, ridiculed Eugene while lowering the dimming holy sword. Gavid's eyes quivered when he saw Eugene's smile. Eugene placed the holy sword back inside his cloak before turning around. Where are you going? Asked Gavid when he saw Eugene walking away. The demonic sword was still in his hand, but the human who had made him unleash the blade was walking away as if he didn't care. I'm going to stop since you pulled out your sword, answered Eugene. What? Because I don't have a reason to keep going anymore, continued Eugene. He never looked back, not even once, and Gavid stood silently while gazing at Eugene's back. Then he looked down at the demonic sword in his hand, then the leftover rag he once called his uniform. Gavid swallowed the anger that seethed from deep inside his heart. He wanted to cut down that human this instant, but he knew he could not. The command of his lord was absolute. Even so, he had drawn glory. It felt disgraceful and humiliating to have drawn glory without orders from the demon king of incarceration. Crunch. Gavid turned around while gnawing on his lower lip. He sheathed glory, then jumped over the fallen wall. He no longer wanted to stay in the fortress. He didn't know whether he could maintain his reason if he saw Eugene Lionheart's face again because of the humiliation. The demon knights were flustered by his actions, but they quickly grouped up and followed Gavid over the fallen wall and out of the fortress after covering themselves with fog. Well, that was a surprise, grumbled Eugene, shaking his left hand. He had only intended to power up his attack slightly, but Agaroth's ring had grown it out of proportion on its own. The war god's ring was usually calm, but it seemed to act of its own accord whenever Eugene wielded the holy sword. Once Eugene trotted back, the Emperor of Kiel roared. Eugene Lionheart, he said, what have you done? How could you attack the Duke of Helmuth? The revelation, shouted Eugene while raising his hands. His loud, dramatic cry left the Emperor speechless. And that's what happened. The Emperor turned his stupefied gaze toward the Pope. What a ridiculous excuse. Look here, Pope Aurius. Are you going to let him use the God of Light, the brilliant Almighty, as an excuse like this? The master of the Holy Sword could not help it, muttered the Pope after a slight pause while recalling the events that took place in the audience chamber. No one had ever imagined that such words would come out from the stubborn fanatic's lips. "Ah!" roared Molin. It was a sudden laugh and untimely as well. However, that wasn't the case for Molin. He was simply delighted that Hamel was no different from 300 years ago, that he had not changed. Ha. Aman-Roar followed along and burst into laughter simply because his ancestor had laughed. Anise, however, did not laugh. She quietly retracted her wings and glared at Eugene with eyes that could kill. Sister, Christina called out. God will forgive us even if we smash his head with a mace. I cannot cast a miracle to fix a broken head yet. Then we'll make do with breaking a few bones, thought Anise while grabbing her flail. Chapter 239 Lehane 10. I'm sorry. Eugene hung his head in contrition and made no move to defend himself. He was all too aware that when Anise was in this state, there was no use in attempting to excuse his behavior. Any other person might have tried to offer some feeble justifications, but Eugene knew better than to waste his breath. Instead, he knew his only option was to apologize immediately and without reservation. Anise's voice was laced with incredulity as she asked Eugene, "Do you even comprehend what you have done wrong?" Despite the 3 distinct curves on her face, the upturned corners of her lips and the crinkles that were her eyes, an unmistakable aura of menace emanated from her. Eugene couldn't help but tremble with fear, even though he couldn't see her eyes clearly, which were narrowed into a crescent shape. He was intimately familiar with the frigid and piercing glare that lay concealed behind those half-closed lids. Ehem. Molen cleared his throat suddenly with no particular reason other than to break the tension in the room. As a fellow man and a warrior, he felt a sense of obligation to come to Eugene's defense and placate Anise's ire. But as soon as Anise turned her beaming gaze towards him with a slight tilt of her head, Molen found himself holding his breath, uncertain of what to say next. Molen had endured the full brunt of Anise's wrath for far longer than Hamel had 3 centuries ago. Or rather, it was more accurate to say that Anise had borne the greatest suffering on account of Molen's recklessness. Every time Molen charged forward like an ignorant buffoon, heedless of the danger behind him, Anise would be compelled to follow in his footsteps, all the while unleashing a torrent of curses that could make even the most hardened warrior flinch. Whenever Molen wielded his axe and hammer wildly, Anise was left with no choice but to immediately perform her miraculous healing abilities to mend Molen's injuries. Molen's remarkable bravery and unwavering fearlessness had enabled him to lead countless battles to triumph. Yet, it was only through Anise's repeated acts of divine intervention that Molen had managed to survive each battle, always fighting at the front lines. Anise's miraculous abilities had prevented Molen from sustaining fatal injuries or becoming permanently disabled, allowing him to continue fighting and leading their troops to victory time and time again. Whenever the pain from her stigmata, frustration, and anger reached their pinnacle, Anise would unleash her emotions without restraint, directing her lethal barrage almost exclusively at Molen and Hamel. Despite this, Molen felt a sense of joy to see Anise finally venting her emotions after such a long time. However, he did not approach her with a smile or attempt to hug her, even though he was known for his foolishness. He had enough sense to know better than to provoke her further. Molen turned his gaze away, still holding his breath, and remained silent. It was an unspoken declaration that he wanted no part in the ongoing situation. Eugene couldn't help but feel a sense of disappointment and betrayal from Molen's lack of support. You shouldn't have tried to intervene in the first place. Why did you provoke her further by clearing your throat? You pathetic moron, Eugene berated Molen mentally. Eugene hesitated, wondering if he should go as far as getting down on his knees to appease Anise's anger. He stole a quick glance at her, and the sight of her furious expression made him even more uncertain. The 3 of them were standing atop the tower's highest floor, where the chilling winds of the snowfield were blowing in from the shattered windows and walls, adding to the tense atmosphere. Molen was responsible for the icy chill that filled the air. When the Demon King of Incarceration had invaded the fortress, Molen had charged toward him by smashing through the windows and walls, which ultimately caused the frigid winds of the snowfield that filled the room. Eugene had been inwardly worried about the consequences of his attack on Gavid Lindman. However, Gavid ended up leaving the fortress with the black fog. Meanwhile, Anise had played her part by pretending to receive a divine message, while the Pope of Eurus had recognized the Holy Sword and the supposed divine message. Molen had also shown his support for Eugene's actions by patting him on the shoulder and embracing him. Thanks to their help, the other people could not question Eugene's sudden, unexpected actions. Although Kiel's emperor looked absolutely unconvinced, he could no longer press Eugene when even his guardian knight, Alchester Dragonic, also stepped up to protect the young Lionheart. Judging by that bastard's eyes, he's definitely going to find something to question me about. Well, it's none of my business for now. Eugene did some quick mental calculations to gauge the situation. Not only the Emperor of Kiel but also the Sultan of Nahama had expressed their dissatisfaction with Eugene, glaring at him openly. It came as no surprise, given that Amelia Merwin, one of the 3 mages of incarceration, was openly colluding with the Sultan. The director of the Anti-Demon Alliance and the King of Shimuan had also been staring at Eugene with intense gazes, but Eugene had no way of knowing what their intentions were. Anise tilted her head slightly and turned her gaze towards Eugene, her eyes still hidden behind a smile. Her voice was soft and curious when she spoke. "What are you thinking about?" Suddenly, her smile faded slightly, and her eyes opened ever so slightly, revealing a cold, frightening glare that made Eugene shiver. It was even scarier than what he remembered. He held his breath, unable to come up with an appropriate answer, feeling as if he were under intense scrutiny. "Hamel, why should I suffer because of your reckless, lacking, idiotic acts?" continued Anise. "I'm sorry," repeated Eugene. "Why are you apologizing? Do you really know what you've done wrong?" "Hamel, I know you're not sincerely remorseful about your actions. You and I have known each other for a very long time, and I know you better than you might think," said Anise. "I'm sorry," echoed Eugene. "So what did you do wrong?" asked Anise. "The attack on Gavid," muttered Eugene. "Explain to me why that was wrong," said Anise. Eugene knew deep down why he had attacked Gavid Lindman, but expressing it in words proved to be an arduous task. As he hesitated, Anise let out a derisive snort and scoffed at him. "You can't even articulate the reason behind your attack, can you?" she said with a tilt of her head. "It's because your actions were driven by raw emotion, Hamel. That's why you can't coherently explain to anyone the reason behind your actions." "That bastard was asking for it," retorted Eugene. "Hamel, you're asking for a thrashing right now with what you're saying," said Anise. "Isn't it a little inappropriate for you to say something like that? You're very educated, unlike me, so you should." As Eugene stumbled over his words, attempting to express his disapproval, Anise's sudden attack caught him off guard. Before he could even finish his sentence, her weapon, the flail with a dangerous adamantium attachment, hurtled toward him with deadly force. It threatened to split open Eugene's skull. "Why are you avoiding it?" shouted Anise. "I'll die if I get hit." Eugene shouted back. "Don't be a baby. I know well that your current body is much healthier and sturdier than the frail body of your previous life," responded Anise. "Hamel was not frail," Molin suddenly interjected. "Molin, you just shut up and stay still. And what wasn't frail about him?" "Hamel bled and collapsed at the drop of a hat, making life difficult for me," said Anise. "Hamel pushed himself until he was in such a condition." "Hamel was a great warrior," retorted Molin. "Just shut up." Anise glared with fire in her eyes, and Molin obediently and quietly closed his lips. "Hamel, I know it wasn't unusual for you to act so emotionally before, so I could look over that. It was fine for you to act like that 300 years ago. If I were to say shit like it is." "Say shit like it is." "Isn't that a bit?" interrupted Eugene. "Stop cutting me off unless you really do want to get yourself killed," said Anise. "I'm sorry," said Eugene. Anise cleared her throat and continued. "Anyways, to be honest, 300 years ago we had Sir Vermouth even if you had died." Eugene's lips drooped into a frown at her words. He couldn't help but feel a pang of distress. Even if it were true, wasn't it hurtful to say such things directly to his face? "We had Sir Vermouth, so it was fine for you to act recklessly in moderation. Even if you got into trouble while fooling around, we had Sir Vermouth to take care of it. Well, I was there as well as Sienna and Molin. But you cannot continue behaving like that. Hamel, I thought I told you last time. In this era you must be like Sir Vermouth," explained Anise. "You're so mean," mumbled Eugene. "I think your thoughtless behavior is even worse. What if Gavid Lindman went against the will of the Demon King of Incarceration and attempted to kill you instead?" asked Anise. "He's a child who takes pride in being a knight and the blade of incarceration. He would never do that," retorted Eugene. Anise twirled her flail above her head while speaking. That's something we can never be sure about, she said. So, tell me, what did you gain from attacking Gavid? The adamantium sparkled with a dangerous glint, and Eugene gulped, never allowing his eyes to miss the trajectory of the deadly weapon. I gained confidence in many things. Firstly, Gavid and the Demon King of Incarceration will never interfere with what I do unless I go to Babel. The Demon King of Incarceration won't come out of Babel to crush me, nor will he force me to Babel using Gavid, said Eugene. But it wasn't your intention to find out in the beginning, was it? Said Anise. No, well, Anise, you saw that bastard kneeling on the ground, right? There's something about how his greasy, angled hair reflected the light. Just looking at it made me want to give it a good kick. But I thought cutting it off with a sword would be better than kicking it, explained Eugene. So it was because of your emotions in the end. Hamel. What's the difference between a man who can't control his impulses and a bitch? Snarled Anise. Now you're calling me and treating me like a dog, grumbled Eugene. Anise's lips curved into a thin smile, her voice smooth and unwavering. No, Hamel. You're not a mere mutt. You're just a step above that. She gestured with her hands, beckoning Eugene to join her in prayer. Her hands were clasped in front of her chest, and she closed her eyes with a pious expression. Let's pray together, shall we? Repent for your wrongdoing and promise me that you won't act on your emotions again. Repeat after me. From this moment on, I promise to never act recklessly like this, and I vow to never trouble my beloved Anise. Sister. Christina protested. If you want, I will have him add your name as well, Anise promised. I don't want such a thing. Really? Do you really not want it? Christina Rogerus, she who deceives herself cannot obtain salvation by the light and ascend to heaven. I've already been saved, so it's fine. Is that really true? Christina, is your salvation so meager that you would be satisfied with simply watching the fireworks with Hamel? Well, it's not the same for me. I'm greedy, so I will only think that I've been saved after I write new history with Eugene, things that you haven't done with him. Sister, what you're saying is a lot different from what you said before, Christina shouted, but Anise did not answer. Do I really have to include the beloved part? Asked Eugene. Don't bother if you have that much hatred and resentment for me, responded Anise. I love Anise and Hamel, interjected Molin. If you run your mouth one more time, I swear, growled Anise. Anise, tell me the truth. You're more upset about how you embarrassed yourself in front of others than worried about me, right? Asked Eugene. You already know the answer, so why are you even bothering to ask me, Hamel? I am over 300 years old, and yet because of you I had to go through so much trouble, spread my wings, dance, and even tear my hair out in frustration. You were too busy quarreling with Gavid to notice, but the way the priests of Uras treated me. Do you have any idea how those children who once revered me as the saint and followed my every word and action looked at me? Do you know what kind of expressions they had on their faces? The thought alone caused Anise's face to flush with heat, making her cheeks feel as though they were on fire. She quickly brought her hands up to cover her face, clasping them together in prayer. Eugene acquiesced without a word at Anise's statement, clasping his hands together in front of his chest. As he considered the situation, he realized that Anise had been pushed too far. It was also true that he had attacked Gavdi without any prior warning. Eugene recited, "From this moment on, I won't ever act so recklessly. I vow to never trouble my beloved Anise ever again." You said beloved twice. Does that mean you love me twice as much? Or are you suggesting that you love Christina equally as much? She's listening from inside me, said Anise. I just stuttered, responded Eugene. Hamel, you seem to have sincerely repented, so I will also forgive my beloved Hamel, said Anise with a pleased smile before putting down her flail. Emerging from beneath his cloak, Mare muttered under her breath, Sir Eugene is nothing but an infidel bastard. Her dull, lifeless eyes were fixed on Eugene, causing a heavy sense of guilt to wash over him. I'm going to remember everything. One day, when Lady Sienna is released from her seal, I'll make sure to tell her everything I heard and experienced. Do as you please. If Sienna has a conscience, she will not blame me, said Anise. Why wouldn't she blame you? Said Mare. Anise gave a sardonic laugh in response to Mare's question. Why wouldn't Sienna blame me? She repeated. Think about it, child. It's quite obvious, isn't it? Sienna may have been injured, but she survived. She's sealed away, yes, but she's still breathing. But what about me? My body was broken, my bones were turned to dust, and my flesh was reduced to fertilizer for the next generation of Anises. Anise put on a brooding expression as she spoke about her terrible past. Mare's lips parted and closed repeatedly, a silent indication of her inability to form a response. With my current residence being inside of Christina, who I am compatible with in many ways, it cannot be denied that I am nothing but an unfulfilled spirit. I am like a candle flickering in the wind, liable to vanish at any moment. Furthermore, if Christina rejects me because of her unwillingness to accept my existence. Sister, I would never do something like that. So please don't say something so sad, Christina interjected with a shout. Anise secretly enjoyed Christina's screams. Just like when I took my life in the past, I will disappear in vain without having achieved anything I hoped for. Even so, I will not blame anyone. Not you, Mare Meridian, who treated me like a burglar cat, nor Sienna, who may criticize my deeds, nor you, Hamel, for not holding on to me. Just as soil returns to the earth and dust to dust, I will return to the soil and dust and pray for the happiness and comfortable rest for those I loved in heaven, said Anise before deliberately taking a pause. She took a deep breath, then gave the most benevolent smile she could muster. Even though I may be nothing more than a faint reminder, a ghost, I love all of you. Large drops formed on Molin's eyes and Mare sniffled as well. Even Eugene approached Anise with a sad expression and stretched out his arms before taking her into his embrace. Mare also poked out of the cape and joined in the embrace. I'm sorry. Lady Anise might be mean, but you're still a good person. I also love you, Lady Anise, said Mare. I love Anise as well. Molin took Eugene, Anise and Mare all into his embrace while crying. Anise gave a satisfied smile, sandwiched between the people she loved. The following day, Eugene woke up in the mansion's room that had been allocated to him. The discussion with Anise, or rather Christina, and Molin had persisted until the early hours, but no one had raised an eyebrow. It was, after all, perfectly normal for Molin the Brave, the legendary hero who had confronted the Demon Kings 3 centuries ago, to advise the current hero and saint. Nothing seemed out of place. Furthermore, despite not having had any rest, Molin extended an invitation to all the members of the Lionheart family from the crack of dawn. His purpose was to impart guidance and offer words of benediction to the heirs of the Great Vermouth. I hope that idiot doesn't say anything out of place. Molin had been advised since dawn. Not many people knew that Eugene was Hamel's reincarnation, so Molin was to watch what he would say. Gavid Lindman and the Black Fog had not returned since their departure the previous night. Molin felt a sense of unease brewing within him. As he had mentioned by the gate, he couldn't help but ponder whether Gavid was hatching some sort of scheme out in the vast snowfield. However, Eugene was adamant that Gavid was not capable of such treachery. Despite his earlier disgraceful exit, Eugene believed Gavid was a proud individual loyal to the Demon King of Incarceration. The idea of him seeking revenge was preposterous in Eugene's mind. Additionally, Eugene dismissed any concerns of Gavid launching an attack on the fort with the Black Fog. To him it was an unnecessary worry. Eugene couldn't contain his amusement as he strolled near the fortress wall. Oh my, he chuckled vainly to himself. Christina was not walking alongside him at the moment. Her allegiance was to the Holy Empire, and as the Bishop of Light she was affiliated with the Luminous Covenant, as was the case with all bishops. Hence she was currently in their company. Training was underway outside the fortress. It was a collaboration between Aratha's Magic Corps and wizards belonging to Nahama's School of Dungeons. The knights were currently fighting against a summoned army of monsters. The knights engaged in the ongoing battle belonged to the Anti-Demon Alliance. Standing behind them were healers and priests from the Alliance and Uras, ready to tend to any injuries that may arise. While they were all giving their best effort, it didn't particularly impress Eugene. He knew that demonic beasts were far more formidable opponents than ordinary monsters. Furthermore, monsters tainted with demonic energy were significantly more vicious and dangerous than their uncorrupted counterparts. To Eugene, it appeared that the training they had received only scratched the surface of what was necessary to deal with such threats. But there was no avoiding it. As Amon-Ror had stated, the true value of the night march lay in the gathering of the continent's most influential figures. In fact, even the Demon King of Incarceration had made an appearance just the day before. which meant that the kings were currently occupied with discussions on future preparations within the castle. However, leaving the knights unattended during this time was not an option. Therefore, the knights would continue with their training even though it was dull and somewhat impractical. Nevertheless, the knights found some satisfaction in comparing their skills to those of their peers, which gave them a sense of superiority. It was also an opportunity for headhunting, as many knights and mercenaries were gathered at the night march. Some mercenaries would receive exclusive contracts, and others would even be knighted. "You're watching something quite boring." The owner of the voice approached without hiding his presence, and once he noticed Eugene's lack of response, he spoke first. "It's not that bad once you watch for a while," Eugene said, turning his head. A tall man was staring at Eugene. It was the commander of Shimuan's 12 finest, the first knight, Ortus Newman.